everyone. My name's Tim Couple. I'm from Casey Cardinia Libraries. And today, celebrating 2022's Author Talks here at the library, we're very lucky to have our first guest, her name and her book, Vanessa Len. And her book's coming out on the 1st of February, and it's only a monster. And that's not to describe the size of the book. That's actually the name of it, Only a Monster. It's a fantastic YA fantasy, a little bit spooky, there's a bit of tension in there. It's very exciting. But we're so grateful to have you, Vanessa Len, to join us in conversation today. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is really exciting. This is only my 4th interview, so I'm very excited.
Oh my goodness. Well, we'll try and make it easy on you. As an avid YA reader myself, it's been an absolute pleasure to explore your book, to meet your characters, to get to know Joan, to get to know Ruth, to frown upon Nick, to grumble about Aaron. They've all been really wonderful, and it's been a pleasure. Before we go any further in our interview, I'd just like to do a little acknowledgement of country. The libraries in Casey and Cardinia are on the lands of the Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people. And I'd like to pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and to the wonderful culture of storytelling that they have done for generations. And we are always so lucky when we do have First Nations authors with us, but we are also really grateful for our authors that come to join us beyond that, to keep that storytelling tradition alive.
Thank you.
So Vanessa, how were you very excited to have this first book published? What's the feeling of finally being able to take your book off the shelf and go, yes, it's done?
Oh my, it's incredible. I feel like this whole process has been so surreal. When I first sold the book, I remember I just felt like I was in a 2-week dream, like I was going to wake up at some point and someone was going to be like, oh no, that didn't happen. Maybe I was in a coma, but as the months passed, I slowly realized that it was really happening. So yeah, very, very, very excited to finally be able to hold it in my hands.
I have to admit that it's so wonderful to read fantasy fiction when we've been through such a crazy couple of years, because for a lot of people, you know, we're stuck at home or isolating, whatever we're doing, and you just kind of want to be able to get out of that headspace a little bit. And I found that Only a Monster was a really good way to kind of just forget about perhaps some of the more serious stuff that's happening in the world and focus on the world of monsters and monster hunters and traveling through time. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to you and to all of our fantasy and science fiction writers from Australia who have made 2021, 2022 already an exciting year for fantasy fiction. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, when I was writing the sequel, I also really appreciated being able to, if I couldn't go outside for more than an hour a day, at least I could go outside in my head.
Well, yeah, that's it. Well, for those that haven't got their hands on the book, I know it's coming out on the 1st of February. Would you be able to maybe summarize a little bit about the story of Joan and Only a Monster?
Yeah, so it's about a monster girl whose summer is absolutely ruined when this cute guy at work turns out to be a monster slayer. It's got time travel, it's got a little mini heist in a monster court, it's got a cute dog, it's got monster point of view, families with powers. I feel like if you like Doctor Who, if you like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if you like kind of the twists and turns of Vampire Diaries, you might like Only a Monster.
I have to say, I did get a little bit of a Buffy vibe from some of the scenes in it. And I thought to myself, I was going to ask Vanessa if she's a bit of a Slayer fan.
Yeah, definitely. Very inspiring.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And it's just a lot of fun, because a lot of the stories that you read, a lot of fantasy fiction, you don't necessarily find yourself siding with the monsters. And here we are in the story, not to spoil much, I think it's chapter 2 or the end of chapter 1. And Joan turns to her grandmother, and her grandmother sort of holds her hand and says, oh, by the way, sweetie, you're a monster. You're a monster that steals the life force out of human beings to time travel back in time and have a really fun time doing it. And I thought to myself, wow, that's pretty out there, but also just a really clever twist on that old kind of storytelling kind of trope. where did the idea for where did the idea for sort of flipping the monster to hero kind of come from?
I guess I was really inspired by that feeling you sometimes get when the hero of a story isn't like necessarily the hero of your story. When I was growing up, I guess I really loved like blockbuster films and TV shows. But I would definitely find that there weren't that many heroes that kind of looked and sounded like me, kind of heroes of the Asian diaspora. Yeah. But for some reason, I would sometimes notice that the bad guys would look like me. So I'd be watching and like the hero would be like beating them up and killing them. And I guess I've got a line in the book about how, in movies after the bad guys have been killed, the camera moves away from them and following the hero. But I guess in my own viewing experience, I often find myself I guess a little aware of the few people on screen who look like me, which sometimes means being really aware of just these people dead on the ground while the camera is moving away. So I guess I thought it would be really interesting to write a story about, what would it be like if one of those heroes from those movies who is still very decent and upright and good was fighting against you rather than for you? That was, I guess, the original seed of it.
It is definitely something I'd have to agree with you there for representation of villains in shows. There's this ongoing, I think there's this real challenge in Hollywood to try and make sure that we don't always have villains from the same backgrounds. There was a real 90s vibe where it was like, oh, you're German, you're a bad guy, or oh, you're the notorious British villain in American movies was another one. But to feel like the majority of the characters that you were seeing on screen were basically doing away with people that looked or sounded like yourself must have been pretty, that's awful.
Yeah. I guess you're very immersed in the culture and so I didn't necessarily really notice it until I was a bit older. But yeah, I guess it does give you another perspective. So can generate, I guess, different kinds of stories.
And then that's what I liked about this too, because you do get a little bit of different cultures in it. From Joan's character's perspective, she's got family living on one side of the world, and then she's got family living on the other side of the world. And as we explore this magical monster world, which sort of almost exists on top of the geographical barriers, there's a great line in I think maybe middle of the book where one of the characters says to her, you've got to understand the monster world doesn't play by the same rules as our world does. So you can have monsters from all different parts of the world. And it's almost a really great line. I think there's something about, just disregard all of the stuff that you've ever known, all the prejudices that you've had, all of that stuff. Monsters exist and they transcend all of that stuff. And I kind of wish that was that approach that people had around the world, really, that we all are essentially the same. So, but at the same time, it's really great because, our experiences and what we eat to what we, our experiences growing up to, raising kids and things like that can be slightly different around the world too. So we get there's some really visceral scenes where the characters are describing being in a market when they're younger on one side of the globe, and sensations or smells that they get that transport them back in time to when they were younger, or to the connection to family that they make, which I think was really cool. You did a really, really good job of doing that.
Thank you. I definitely really wanted to explore kind of the idea of a monster culture, sort of to give a metaphor to I guess my own experiences, and really, I guess, a very common experience in Australia of having, a migrant background and having a different culture at home to the one outside. So yeah, it was definitely really also important for me to kind of present a few experiences of that. So I had, as you say, Joan, I guess, goes to a market, she's experiencing eating food, and she kind of notices that, this food is really familiar. It tastes like her grandmother's food. And she thinks, oh, I had thought that was a family thing, but she realizes, oh no, it's actually a cultural thing. It had a bigger context than she knew, which I think is a really common experience. If you're raised in a migrant family, you'll think, oh, perhaps my family's a little eccentric, but then when you realize the wider context of the culture that they come from, you're like, oh no, that's not an eccentricity. That's a cultural thing.
Especially like the way that the characters carry. One thing that I noticed was like the sort of the debt, or like owing another character a favor, is a really interesting kind of trope that follows through these monsters, like a cultural thing for the monsters, where if you've two of the characters, not to spoil it, but Aaron and Joan don't see eye to eye. They don't get along very well for a lot of reasons, but they stick together for a lot of the story because Aaron feels obligated to Joan because Joan sort of helps him out in a situation that's life-threatening. And suddenly she's like, why are you following me? Why are you still here? Don't you absolutely loathe my family? And he's like, well, I can't really let it go. I've kind of made this almost like a blood pact at one point. He's like, I've got to stick with you, which is just like, I don't know.
Yeah, she saves his life, and I think he's a bit annoyed about it because that means he has to help her now.
It's such a grumbly relationship, but but it adds a lot of color to the story, and awesome. There's lots of very funny arguments between them over this kind of obligatory debt. So monsters aren't always big teeth and red eyes and sharp claws. They can be all sorts of different things. I thought about the metaphor for someone who is preying on other people's insecurities, for example, as being a monster. Yes. And you sort of, I guess, was part of what you wanted to explore with this, that monsters don't have to be, your Twilight style vampires. They can be more almost human in their actions, but that can almost be crueler than like a hungry werewolf or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I guess, one of just a fantasy consideration when I was thinking about it was that I wanted them to be hiding in plain sight. So whatever monstrous things that they were doing, I wanted them to be fairly covert, so you wouldn't necessarily know if you were attacked by a monster, for example. So I think I can spoil that in the book, monsters have this ability to steal time from the human lifespan, and then they use that time to travel in time. So they kind of live by moving around time, and it is pretty violent and terrible power. But because the victim of that power doesn't really know about it, it can seem like that they might not have big teeth and may not be scary in appearance, but I guess the power itself is scary.
Well, the repercussions are awful, and the fact that they do this so flippantly as well, like it's not necessarily to expand their own lifespan to take somebody else's life. It's almost spending somebody else's life like you would coins in an arcade. Like they just kind of
just for fun.
I'm going to go back to Rome and watch the gladiators fight, and it's just like, yeah, we'll steal 20 years from this person and 20 years from this person, and we'll time jump backwards. And when I kind of got my head around that in the book, I was just like, they're not just like, some might call them monsters. I just call them jerks. Like, but I thought only a jerk just didn't have the same ring to it, Vanessa. So
maybe that could be the sequel title.
Just jerks, yeah. How much fun was it kind of coming up with those monster powers? I mean, it's more than just the time sapping ability. Each monster belongs to like an heraldry, like a house or a family, and they all have their own little powers. One can detect other monsters. Another one can, I thought it was pretty cool. They can just like summon food, which is just great, because there's a scene that I almost thought you'd kind of did a typo, but it was just like, no. He legitimately magics a magic pie out of midair, and it's hot, and they start eating it. And I'm like, oh, I get it now. They've got
like magic. I wish that was my power.
No, I like cooking too much. I think my power would have to be something really bland. It would have to just be being able to find my car keys without.
Amazing.
So yeah, but did you have a lot of fun doing them?
I did. It was super fun. I guess one of my favorite parts of the whole book, I guess the whole process of writing the book, was that idea generation, world building. And I actually did an exercise before I even started writing the book where I just wrote this really big list of just things that I liked in like narratives. So time travel, when someone like seems really benign, but actually you find out they're really epic. So just like, I guess, just everything I liked in all of narratives. And then I world built out of the things that I liked, because I thought, I'm going to be writing this for a while. I should at least enjoy it. I really recommend that activity to anyone who's like thinking about writing a book. Just make a big list of all the things that you like the most, and then come up with some premises and world building out of that.
Just hold on, I'm just writing that down for my next book. Just give me a second. That's what a great idea, and it must have just meant that the last couple of years have been quite a joy. Has it been a joyful process?
Yeah, it's been really fun. I feel like it helped me just find it an enjoyable experience to write. I know, some of it is really hard, some of it is really challenging, but I always did enjoy it.
Well, I'm so glad. It's so nice to hear that the story that's brought me joy has also been joyful for you as well. It would be really tough to hear if it was just struggle straight for the whole thing.
So painful to write.
Just got it out, because there's some books, sometimes I read a book and I think to myself, that author, I'm just like, oh, that poor person. I'm so glad that ordeal was over, because it's like it's taken, so it's so complex and so elaborate, but that's really nice to hear that there's lots of fun along the way too. Because writing and getting published must be quite I guess a tense process. This is your first book. How was it for you going through the publication process? Was it all right?
Extremely surreal. Everything happened very quickly. So, except the writing. The writing took a long time. A really, really long time. But once I finished it, my agent Tracy read it and she liked it. So that was very exciting. And then she went on submission with the book, which means that she sent it out to publishers pretty quickly. And then it was really, I was just fully in that feeling of, is this really happening? Am I in a coma? Because it sold, within a few days, I think, to Germany and then Spain. I didn't even know that that could happen. And then to, I guess North America and all these other countries, including Australia, for my amazing publisher, Eleanor Unwin. So I feel like my abiding feeling from the whole thing, apart from, excitement and joy, was just, is this really happening?
There's a lot of pinch marks on your arm. Is it really injured?
I mean, I guess I can see the books now.
I wanted to take us back a bit to the story and to some of the characters in it. I think some of my favorite characters, besides of course Joan, was members of Joan's family. I really liked the grandmother character in the story, and I thought that she was written so well, and there's just such an affection there for Joan and a connection as well. And I know growing up for me, my grandmother and I was fortunate enough to have both my grandmothers for quite a long time, and they really impacted a lot on, I don't know, I guess my attitude to life. I think they always had a lust for life, and I feel like I kind of follow in their footsteps. When you were writing the characters in this story, did some of your family or your friends kind of seep into it? You don't have to spoil, you don't have to give it away if you want to keep it a secret. I know some authors are like, we don't talk about them. But was that part of the process?
No, I can honestly say no. Although it's pretty funny. I got a lot of advice about things like Chinese names, making sure that they were correct from my dad and my stepmother. And I just remember when I had to come up with a name for Joan's dad, who is Chinese Malaysian, like my dad, he just goes, oh, why don't you just name him after me? And I was like, don't you think that would be really weird? And he's like, no, doesn't matter, just name him after me, which I did not do. But when he read it, he was like, this dad, who's a very lovely dad, like my dad, he was like, he's very similar to me. And I was like, okay. But he wasn't actually based on my dad.
Wow. So you sort of subconsciously, your dad is reading between the lines and implanting himself into your story as well. I
guess I had had some cultural pointers, like they put, the they put fresh tea in the freezer, and he's like, I do that. And I was like, that is true. You do that. So I guess he was recognizing, I guess, some of the cultural things that I was putting in there.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so not officially, but maybe just a little bit.
No. No one is a monster in my life.
So we talk a lot about monsters. We talk about the psychological effects of these powers being quite scary. And the more I think about it, the more sinister the whole kind of idea of these monsters is. But when I first got the book and I saw the beautiful cover art and I saw the name of it, I thought instantly, oh wow, we're going down an Anne Rice path. We're going down a Stephen King, Christopher Pike. I thought that this was going to be like horror. But it's actually got elements of horror in it. So it's got some spooky bits in it. But I felt like this is a really approachable story for people that are just really after some sort of a very exciting, almost like a thriller with a fantasy element to it. Was your desire when you were writing it to make it sort of for horror fans and other fans of other genres? Or did you sort of have in your mind that you wanted to sort of keep away from the horror, it just so happened to have monsters in it?
Yeah, it's really funny because in my mind, I'd always thought it was like a fantasy novel with time travel. But when early readers started reading it, I saw some people were starting to tag it as horror, like on Goodreads, and I was like, what? But then of course I realized, oh yeah, of course it is, it does have cousins, certainly has cousins in horror, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I feel like it has probably about that level of horror where there are elements of horror, but because we're following the story from the point of view of the monsters, I think you kind of forget the horror sometimes of what they're doing. It becomes like perhaps more fantasy than horror genre, although I guess the powers would be horror if you were telling the story from the hero's side.
I think it's one of those stories where it could go either way. So when it becomes a Netflix TV series or when it becomes a movie, I can just see it either going down that kind of Sabrina, the horror kind of elements of Sabrina with people's eyes changing color and being able to detect these other monsters in the environment. But it's not like overblown. Like I'd be quite comfortable giving this to someone who's enjoyed even just like YA romance or YA kind of platonic romance as well, because it's got those elements in it, but there isn't like.
I don't think it's too scary. I know that a couple of people thought there were a couple of scary moments, which I hadn't even thought was scary either.
What do you gauge? What's scary for you? What would have to happen?
I'm scared by any supernatural horror. So I'm anything. If there's suddenly a ghost, that even like a really lovely ghost that's like cheering everyone up, I'm just suddenly really scared of it.
Stay away from Casper then.
Yeah, I'm like, oh no, change the channel.
Okay, so we keep that out of it. Great. There's a really good TV series I think called Ghost Stories, which I watched.
Yeah, no.
Absolutely.
Absolutely not.
I'm so glad we're having this discussion and people can reflect on this interview later and be reading it and go, oh no, she's a chicken. It's fine.
She really shied away from the true horror.
Well, let's go. I'm glad. And I'm glad you also mentioned that, there is that time travel. There is that sort of almost that there's science fiction to this. I almost think in some ways it did have elements of almost like a Doctor Who story, which I love. Are you a Doctor Who fan?
I am a Doctor Who fan. I feel like you can probably tell.
Oh, that makes two of us. Okay, very good. I won't argue about who your favorite Doctor is because we could be here all day.
It's nine.
Oh, really? Oh, there you go. Yeah, see, I think maybe might be. I think it probably is, but I do like the eyebrows.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the Clarion Sci-Fi Writers Convention. You went, it's not a convention, it's a full workshop.
Yeah.
How was that for you? For those that don't know about it, do you want to give people a little bit of an explanation about what it actually is and what happens?
Yeah. So it's a very long-running science fiction and fantasy workshop. You live you live all together, 18 of you, for 6 weeks, and you write a story a week and you critique 4 stories a day. So it's extremely intense, super fun, and it's very appealing because I feel like all my favorite science fiction and fantasy writers either went there or they tutored there. So I had kind of always wanted to go, and I just decided, one year, I really want to take writing, I want to take it seriously in a way of like, I want to invest in it myself. So I thought I'm gonna apply this year. And I was really excited to get in. One of my favorite writers, Karen Joy Fowler, was an instructor that year. And it's just the most fun experience. I'm still in touch with all the people I went to it with. And I feel like I could not believe how much I learned from it in 6 weeks.
That seems an awful lot to be critiquing and reading at least 4 stories a day.
It was so full on. I really remember the feeling of trying to finish my story and falling asleep as I was writing. It was so intense.
That's very funny, because there was something, at least 2 of the chapters in the story have Joan waking up from some awful nightmare, and I bet you. And I was thinking, no, I bet you Vanessa's had that happen to her with just writing. Oh, the deadline's tomorrow. But that's very cool. And so with that, is there things in the story that were crafted during your time there that have kind of gone into this story, or did you just overall learn a lot of things that you'd like to incorporate into your writing?
Yeah, I guess interestingly, I did write a short story, I guess, set in this world, although not. It was such an early part of my thinking about that world that it probably doesn't really resemble the book that much, but I was definitely starting to think about it already. But all of the other short stories were completely other worlds. But yeah, I feel like this book had a long gestation of thinking before I even started writing it.
But that's really cool. If you were sort of starting to create the world in other bits of writing, I think for young writers, that must be a very good launch pad for them if they develop an idea and then hone it maybe over a bigger story later on.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the playing with ideas, and I love playing with that. I'm a big fan of like cinema, but I'm also a big fan of game development as well, and watching how game developers sort of create those beta testing worlds, and they start to build it and populate it with different creatures and things. And I think to myself, oh man, this is imagination in
it's so fun.
Yeah.
And that's fun to make up a world.
Something so much fun about just writing fantasy, but creating worlds and building all of that stuff.
It's super fun.
Awesome. So I guess I wanted to ask you, it sounds like you're very busy with your writing, but do you get time to read for fun or read for pleasure as well?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And lucky me, I guess much like you, I get to read books that haven't been published yet. So yeah, it's
Isn't
so
it
fun.
exciting? I have to, I'll sneaky peek it. When Vanessa said to me, you got a copy of the book? And I said, yes. And then I showed her, it's this giant manuscript, and I felt a bit silly, but look, that's just the way it goes when you first get it. But what have you been reading? Can you give us the scoop?
So I read this amazing book recently by a new author called Rhys M. Nielsen. It's her first novel. It's called Deep in Providence, and it's about these 3 girls whose friend has recently died in a car accident. And it's got a slight fantasy element. So they turn to this very dangerous magic just because they miss her so much and they really want to bring her back. It's just so moving, just this really beautiful exploration of grief and friendship, love. I was so blown away by it. I kind of want to read it again.
Well, you might get the chance to when it's fully out and published.
Yeah, I can't remember when it comes out, but it's sometime this year.
Excellent. We'll have to keep an eye out for it. So it was Deep in Providence
by Rhys M. Nielsen.
Rhys M. Nielsen. Excellent. I forgot to mention, this book my copy of it doesn't have the cover, but I did find, I'll see if I can bring up a picture of the cover of this book, of your book, because I was really impressed with the cover art for it. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Hang on, it's a bit small. Oh, wow. And I just thought when I saw that, I was like, right, I'm going to give them a call. I'm going to go down to the tattoo parlor. I'm going to get it. It's such a sick pattern on there. I think it was Evian Tan who did it. Did you end up? How did that end up
she's
coming
a Melbourne
about?
artist. Yeah, she's a Melbourne artist, and the US publisher Harper Teen found her. Amazingly, I don't know if they knew that we were both from Melbourne, but I found that I really loved that part of it. She read the book and she made the most beautiful cover art. It's so symbolic. After you've read the book, you can see things like that house upside down with a wing on fire. I guess all of those things start really make sense after you've read it. But I was so in love with this cover. I was so happy when the publisher sent me the draft, which amazingly actually didn't look that much different from this. It was a very finished draft. So I loved it as soon as I saw it.
Yeah, and I think people are going to fall in love with that cover as well. I usually say don't judge a book by its cover, but when you've got something like that on the shelf, you're probably going to pick it up and have a bit of a gander at it, which is really cool. I just recently got some beautifully done covers of the Leigh Bardugo Shadow and Bone ones.
Yeah.
And I completely accidentally ordered deliberately the best looking covered ones. And someone said to me, "Oh, that's a very fancy looking version of the book." I said,
I love a special edition of a book.
Exactly.
Love an alternative cover.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I guess we're almost at the end of the interview, Vanessa. I'm so excited for people to get their hands on this and to explore this monster world that you've created. Do you have any last advice for any young writers out there that might be thinking of getting into writing fantasy? What would some of your tips be for them? I think you mentioned one earlier, but if you've got any other ones that you've got up your sleeve.
Yeah, definitely would recommend making that big list of all the things that you like. And then I would definitely suggest, just making connections with other writers. It can be such a solitary thing to write, but it doesn't have to be. You could be doing it with friends. It can be really fun. Before the pandemic, I used to write once a week, just with other people, just, to have company, to have a chat about how our books are going. So I definitely recommend that. And, you can meet people in workshops like I did, but also just around you. Like when I started talking about how I was writing a book, just a bunch of, my friends I already had or people at work were like, "Oh, I'm writing a book." So that was really nice too.
That's incredible. So you were just out one day at dinner and you just so happened to drop that you were doing some writing. Exactly, and everybody else did the same.
Yeah, and people were like, "Oh, I've been writing a book," and then we swap books, and it's really fun. It's really fun. So you might have people in your life already who are doing, have the same goals that you have. And I guess the other thing I would say, there's so many opportunities for Australian writers here, overseas. I had no idea until I guess I wrote this book and then discovered this whole huge community of YA writers in particular here in Australia.
It's been really wonderful to get to meet a lot of them doing our podcast. And we had a chat to another fantasy author last year, C.S. Pacat, who
she's my
read your
partner.
book. Yeah, and popped a little message at the top that said, unput downable once you've picked it up, which I thought was very flattering. So that's really nice. If you've got friends in writing, is it motivating as well? Do you kind of push each other to kind of get your work out there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely motivating. You can solve each other's problems. If you're having a plot problem, it really helps to be able to talk it through with somebody else. And there is also something about somebody else having that world alive in their minds as well. That makes it stay fresh in your mind. It kind of gives you that added excitement when somebody else knows what you're talking about when you say your characters' names.
That's very funny, isn't it? It's like, Joan.
Yeah, my friend Joan.
Yeah. Joan the monster that lives she's living in London in a secret loft above a market. That's the way it goes. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for chatting with us. Once again, I can't thank you enough for writing this book, getting us out of the doldrums, introducing us to a magical world full of very interesting monsters. I look forward to all of your future works. I think you let slip you might be working on a sequel.
I am. I guess the first book has a pretty complete ending, but I guess it definitely leads some threads for a sequel. So I've been working on that.
Don't give it away.
I've
been trying really hard not to spoil it. So.
I know. I'm like, from where can I do I have to stop talking about the plot?
I'll put a spoiler warning in and then we'll ruin it all. No, we won't do that. If you're interested in finding out more about Vanessa Len's writing, you can visit her. Is it your website? I think, is it Vanessa Len?
VanessaLen.com.
How good is that? You can also go to the Allen and Unwin and have a look at the front cover there and check out some other YA authors that they've got coming up as well, which is pretty cool. If you want to find more interviews from the library, you can have a listen to our podcast we have called Book Matters. But you can always check on the website because we've got a few more authors coming up this year. So Vanessa, all the best with it all. Don't touch the back of my neck and steal my life force. I'm quite happy with the last 2 years being a write-off. I wish you all the success with the book. And if you are in the mood for some exciting YA fantasy fiction, go and pick yourself up a copy of Only a Monster from the 1st of February. Thank you so much.
Thank you.